I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we are back with another Q&A for you guys. You guys really came through with some really interesting questions this time.
Woot.
So if we did not answer your question, definitely we will try to get to it in another Q&A session. But if you do have any kind of paranormal questions, make sure to utilize that Q&A button on TikTok, because that way I will actually see it. And so I don't have to comb through the comment section anymore.
Absolutely, because that gets like super thick, right?
Yeah. Seriously, y'all, it really does. It gets lost.
When we were first starting out, we had a couple viral TikToks. Madison was like, going through like thousands.
Yeah,
like combing through thousands of comments to find a question. So it's nice that y'all are utilizing that Q&A section on TikTok. Before we get started, I want to thank a couple of our new patrons this week. Thank you, Poober, Allison F., Fanny Garcia, and Ann Jane. We really, really appreciate you guys for supporting us, and we are going to be uploading all these episodes first thing when I get them up. So,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so if you have been on the edge of wanting to become a patron, you do get exclusive content. You get just random posts from us that we decide that we want to put up on Patreon at a whim. You also get exclusive voting rights to certain tiers, and that includes coming up with our fan base name. Our patrons were given the exclusive opportunity to choose that name. So,
and what's that name?
Para Junkies.
Woo!
Wow.
Hashtag ghost heroin.
Yes. Thank you, Chris.
It was a joke.
But it stuck. It stuck real hard. But that's okay. So thank you, Poober, on Patreon for coming up with that one. You guys had really good options.
We got a bunch of great names.
Yeah, but that one's fun.
Yeah.
So.
We put it to a vote.
Yes.
All righty. Let's go ahead and get started with the first question. The first question comes from Cat Knight 00, and Cat Knight asks, does the shadowy hat man only appear at night to look at you, or can he/they also appear in dreams as well? If so, what can it mean?
Interesting.
Wow. That's a lot.
I know. We're starting off strong here. So with the Hat Man, a lot of people have reported, and off of my own personal experience with the Hat Man, he never showed up in my dreams. He usually just stood in the threshold of my door. And same thing with my sister. That's exactly what she reported seeing, he doesn't really interact with people. Some people have had other experiences with him where like he's talked to them or, things of that nature. But I feel like that's a different entity than what is considered the Hat Man or the man with the hat. So
right. And it's interesting because the Hat Man, I've spoken to people, for the last 20 years I've been speaking and I would come across people who have the same kind of experience. And intriguingly, in all the cases that I spoke to people about, they had the same, when they saw him, he was always in the hallway of their house, which I thought was indicative of something. No real answer, and I don't know how much of that is a part of the greater Hat Man lore, because I think people tend to see him, at a certain distance, oftentimes the sensation of being followed or having this thing behind them. And when they look, they catch like a glimpse of a man in a hat. And very rarely does anybody ever see his face.
Yeah.
In fact, notably, he doesn't seem to have a face. That does not exclude the spirit from showing up in your dreams. And a lot of people will suggest that our dreams are a astral plane that we travel to. Our subconscious is in fact another place that has access to spirits. It is a threshold. So the threshold of our world to the next world might be the dreamlands.
Are you saying when I have a dream and talk to my Mimi in the dream that I might be actually talking to Mimi?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it happens.
Does that happen often?
Every once in a while, yeah.
Yeah. So I have my whole life I've always said that one of the clearest and easiest ghost stories is a beloved person visiting you in your dream. Someone who had passed coming to your dream to speak to you or to speak words of comfort or explain things to you. So yeah, absolutely. I
often have dreams of Mimi. Like we used to watch Golden Girls together. Like I was like 10 and she would sit there in her chair and there'd be a bunch of like paper towels stuffed in the crevices of the chair because she just liked that. And we would just watch Golden Girls, and sometimes my dreams it's like there in that area because that's like one of the fondest memories.
Sure, absolutely.
Watching Golden Girls.
Well, I think even if you wanted to be more practical about your ghost stories, memories are ghost stories. When you remember somebody who has passed, when you think on them fondly, you are experiencing their essence, their love, that connection. So even in the simplest terms, when you say, I just, suddenly a thought of so-and-so came into my mind, that very likely is a ghostly encounter because we're so hard with our definitions. We always spend so much time trying to classify and identify. But the truth of the matter is, if you're thinking of someone who has passed and you're feeling something for somebody who has passed, you are having a direct connective and true experience with a deceased person. So there's no reason to use the word, well, that's just a memory. Do you have any idea how remarkable it is that we have memories? When you think of this lump of meat in our skull,
it's very true.
The functions that must go into it, and then that we can conjure up people who have left us in the past, and we can still feel and sense. Have you ever walked into a building and gotten the whiff of something that was like, oh, that smells like my grandmother's perfume, or old books. Old books smell like my grandparents' house. My grandparents' house was just full of bookshelves, and all those books, basically rotting on the shelves for decades and decades and decades, created this wonderful, pungent aroma. So when I go into old bookstores, I immediately am taken back to my grandparents' house.
Oh wow, yeah,
it's true. Yeah, and
it's like a residual haunting.
Exactly.
In a way, yeah.
A physical manifestation.
Yeah. And I mean, loved ones especially have different ways to go about, communicating once they've passed over, depending on what's going to catch your attention. So you are definitely the type of person that you're so moving around a lot that Mimi probably isn't thinking well, let me show up as a cardinal or whatever.
Because they won't be able to catch me.
Well, no, not that. No,
so
that you're not gonna pay attention.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not gonna get in pick up to you where you're like, oh, that could be my Mimi. Like how in the way that my grandmother manifests herself as cardinals. We see them everywhere. Everybody in my life sees cardinals now. She's a very intense spirit, but
she pecks at the glass over there.
She does.
And over there.
Yeah, when she wants attention. But yeah, so maybe dreams are the best way to get you to, because you can't get away from it.
I can't.
It's like,
I wonder also if because it often goes back to that area of the house in Zephyr Hills, Florida, of us watching the Golden Girls, like right there, the TV, that chair. But also, do you think that there's a reason, do you think that is basically that's the place where she also died? She had a brain aneurysm right in front of that TV. She was supposedly getting the medical examiner said that it was a brain aneurysm, and basically she just was walking and it was like that. I mean, she said they said that she didn't suffer at all and she just collapsed right there onto the floor. And do you think that has anything to do with the fact that that's where I kind of like talk to her or just am like?
I mean, it could be a part of it, for sure. I mean, that's the place where, her life ended, but it's also a place of comfort for you. It's not, it would be weird if Mimi showed up and you're like in a white room with like one chair or something. That would be creepy.
That would be not Mimi.
Well, exactly. That would be real creepy. So, it's also, like, how is this going to be comfortable for him? Like,
and worth mentioning, and we should do an entire episode on this. You do not have to be dead to haunt a place. Mm-hmm. And so your memory of that is you haunting that place. Oh. Your fond memory, your investment, your connection to place. It's very likely that in that house in Zephyr Hills, people might walk through that room and get a small JT in the room because that's how you visit. That's that concept. And we'll do a full episode on residual haunting and the idea that there's no book that says you have to be dead to be a ghost.
True.
Wow.
And that is really a worthwhile thing to explore.
I think so.
JT's all right. I'm a ghost.
I'm a ghost. All right, on to the next one. Dan Barbie asks, can someone who used to be able to see and hear spirits as a kid reopen or reattach themselves to see it again? That's a good question.
Absolutely. Something that I usually tell people is that everybody has a certain degree of psychic abilities of sorts, that's why children are the most susceptible to having paranormal experiences, is because they haven't closed it off yet. Their imaginations are still vivid enough, and they haven't been shunned by the world, and shamed for being able to see things yet. And that's why usually as an adult, if you're not able to see the same things anymore, it's because you were probably told, well, that's not real. You didn't see that. Ghosts aren't real. You just have a vivid imagination or whatever it is. And so we put on these degrees of armor of sorts to protect ourselves from things. But because of that, it completely cuts off our abilities. And so it really takes a matter of taking off that armor and working through all of that, all of the stuff that we go through as we age and, mature, trying to figure out how to connect back to what was it that, made it so real for you as a child, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah. So that makes sense. That's kind of my take on it. And some people are more susceptible to being open than others. I think neurodivergent people tend to be a bit more open to it. But there are also people who, always keep this childlike sensibility to them, and they sometimes are a bit more open. So I think just like maybe working through past traumas or working through, your why you want to connect back again is a good first step.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this brings me back to theory that I've always had. I call it the reality station, and the concept is we're all radios. We're built like radios. We receive and we transmit, and when we're very young, we just go up and down the dial. We just change the station. We'll go really far away and have these wild imaginations and wild things happening to us and have all of this experience. But people are like, no. You have to be on the reality station. Mm-hmm. And they say, tune into the reality station or no one will pay attention to you. No one will understand you. They will lock you away if you spend too much time not on the reality station. So they'll say, the reality station, let's say it's 105.3. 105.3, tune into 105.3. If you're not on 105.3, you're on a different station. You are experiencing things, seeing things, having all these different experiences. And one of the most common things that I've experienced in my life as far as people who suddenly become aware of the supernatural is a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Something, a car crash, a near-death experience. But basically what that's done is that's nudged them off of 105.3 to 105.5. And at 105.5, they still have the reality station, but they have the next station over, kind of bleeding in, little bits of it, and they're having more experiences. They're not so far away from reality that they're going to get locked up, but they are getting that next station over. And the truth of the matter is, as we grow up, we forget where the controls are. We forget where that knob that lets us go up and down the dial is. Mm-hmm. And there are people who proclaim to be able to open that, to get us back to the dial, to get our hands on the dial through meditation, through experiences, extreme experiences. A lot of people think that's kind of what a sweat lodge is. That's kind of what those extreme yogis go through, is an alteration of their physical existence to allow them access to that spiritual, station tuner that allows them to move up and down the dial. And in other cultures, we call it enlightenment, whereas here we call it insanity.
It's true.
In other cultures, people really work hard to experience this extrasensory perception. But in Western society, we think that that's madness. We think that you are, losing grip of reality, when in fact what you're doing is you're augmenting reality, or you're actually saying reality is a fixed notion. And nothing's more clear to explain that than light. We only see and perceive a very small fraction of light. There's a wide spectrum of light that we cannot perceive with our naked eyes. We need equipment and tools to see that. And the fact that we can only perceive a small fraction of light tells us that we are only perceiving a small fraction of reality.
Yeah.
So it's worth that openness, to be open-minded, and to not just shut the door because you were told that there is nothing beyond the door, or that the door doesn't even exist. Oh goodness! Oh my! I'm so embarrassed. Let me do something about that. Why would I have a 9:30 alarm? Okay, sorry. But
it's 9:30.
It's 9:30 a.m. I'm supposed to take my antibiotics, which I didn't bring with me, so I'll get it later. Okay. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought. Let's go on to the next.
Yeah. All right, on to the next one. Let's see. Aaron Bailey, 2002, asks, I've never really been super sensitive to paranormal up until now. Lately, I've been super sensitive. Why do you think that changes for some people?
So, kind of in the same realm of things. So, honestly, when I was looking through questions, y'all had a lot of similar questions, which is good. But basically, it's the same kind of concept. So maybe like as a child, I don't know, like maybe you had family or friends or people who told you or maybe they were just staunch skeptics and they don't believe in paranormal or things like that. And a lot of times that rubs off on the children and the people around them. So it's very possible maybe you moved away from your family, or you moved out, or maybe you have started developing your own sense of reality of sorts.
Maybe it's this podcast.
It's possible.
Maybe hear me out. Maybe ever since you've been listening to this podcast, you've been thinking, maybe I do believe in ghosts and all of that. And now they're showing themselves to you because
you're learning
about it.
It aligns with a certain theory. I have a lot of theories. It aligns with the theory that we tell ghost stories to open our perception.
Yeah.
Like just the thought of being scared is part of the journey of accepting that it might be real. Fear is a type of faith because you're afraid of something. And you can easily say it doesn't exist, but the fear is real. The sensation is real, which leaves the door a little bit open. But it's also worth noting, have you moved into a new place?
That's true.
Because you can go to a location that has a very powerful presence that allows, that supersedes your own ideal, reality. What you think is firm and real. If you go to a place where the spirits are a little more active and able to present themselves. I refer to things as the now my brain is a watering hole. It's a watering hole. The idea of the watering hole is basically that we as entities, we as humans, get a spiritual energy from somewhere, like a big, and I call it the watering hole. We all go to the watering hole. And when we wake up, we need that psychic nourishment. So we go to the water hole. And while we're at the watering hole, other spirits have a hard time getting to the water. We are all crowded in. But at night, while we're asleep, the watering hole becomes open. And the spirits can go in and get nourishment, get energy. And that's why, in my estimation, late at night, that's where ghosts have enough energy to present themselves and show themselves. It's because we're not sucking up all the water. We're not blocking them out. But there are ghosts strong enough to muscle through the crowd. And those ghosts are usually ghosts that show up in the middle of the day.
Yes.
Those ghosts are usually the loud ghosts and the ones who can do something because they are not inhibited by the living. The living aren't an obstacle to the energy they need. So, sometimes you're just in a place where access to the watering hole is so great that the supernatural entities, paranormal things, are able to go to the watering hole, power up, and present themselves. And wow. Now you are you're on even ground. It's not. That's the question of like living alone. Like if you're living alone for the first time, if you're living in an apartment alone, you are not crowded in by a bunch of people. You don't have the whole family all going to the watering hole together,
True.
Keeping the spirits from getting to the watering hole. If it's just you in an apartment, now you're sharing a space with whatever entities are there, and there's probably equal access to that watering hole.
That's
we're all just
super
gazelles.
We're just gazelles.
We're just
Yeah.
gazelles. And by maybe talking about spirits and opening yourself up to the spirits, maybe you're backing away from the
You're
watering
inviting
hole,
them to the watering
and you're
hole.
like, come
Absolutely.
get you a drink.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I love the metaphors, man.
Absolutely.
Like,
No, that's
they're so concise.
That's a great metaphor for it.
It really is.
Yeah.
All right, on to the next one. Renee Del Rey, see what you did there, asks, I'm curious on what more you have to speak about the man with the hat.
I told you.
Goodness,
Yeah.
okay. Because I have experienced that, and he would walk to my sister's room too. So I actually have a theory to a certain degree and this is only if, I'm always thinking dark. So this is only if the man with the hat is like, a bad thing, which most likely isn't, but you never know. But like a vampire, wouldn't you have to invite the man with the hat in a way, or maybe he's waiting for an invite. Even if he's good, maybe he's waiting for an invite.
I don't know I think he's more of a voyeuristic kind of spirit, less than a vampire sort of type deal. Because
no, it's a vampire.
I know.
I want to be a vampire.
JT loves when things are like
demon.
Yeah, he's like boogeyman.
Demon.
Yeah, he loves things like that. But I personally, from my experience, I've never had him talk to me. I've never even picked up on any sensation that he really wants to interact in that way. It's just more so, I think this is a spirit that is interested by the living.
And even more to the point, the concept of a watcher. A watching spirit is pretty much hand in hand with existence. Ever since humans were able to communicate to another human being, they have made the suggestion that they're being watched. And it grew into guardian angels. It grew into this concept that there are just spirits that are watching us. And by definition, the man in a hat is void of all description. He has no identity. He is a figure in a hat. And he's very shadowy, so I oftentimes think of him as a shadow man.
Absolutely, yeah.
But he is identified by the fact that he's wearing a hat and that he does not interact. That is a big part of the man in a hat scenario, is people see him at a distance watching them. And there's this concept that maybe there is a supernatural occupation, which is to watch humans, to watch over humans, to, I don't know if it's to guard us or to
kill.
Report back.
I don't think it's
there's
kill.
just not enough menace in any of the man in hat.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the boogeyman one day. The boogeyman is
yeah.
fascinating, and there's a lot of great. Every culture has a boogeyman, so we can get into boogeymen, but I don't think the man in a hat falls in that category because I've also never heard of anybody saying that they were scared of the man and they were uneasy. Yeah. But they weren't they didn't feel threatened. They felt, well, there's a man, and that's creepy enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do, especially because children are often the ones that see him. I feel like he could be exactly that, a guardian of sorts, or just someone that's there to observe children. I know, the spirits in my house growing up were very protective over me as a child. They started to back off a little bit as I got older, but especially when I was a younger child, they were very, very guarded, constantly making sure that I was okay.
And that also gives way to the idea that children are more likely to see entities, which makes them a higher value asset.
That is true.
Mediums and people who can see spirits, clairvoyants, they are all high value assets to spirits because it is a anchor to this world. If you think that they're just untethered and looking for purpose or trying to execute a purpose, having somebody who can see them, having somebody that they can communicate with, that really does make a lot of sense that children experience these spirits often, that when people who have the gift of sight experience these spirits, they are persistent and protective because they know that having a human being who can acknowledge their existence is key to whatever process they're going through.
I'm a high value asset. Thank you.
High value asset.
You are a high value asset, baby.
Thanks.
All right. On to the next one. JK123 asks, I've been seeing the man in the hat lately. I never saw spirits as a kid. Why am I starting to see spirits now? I'm just joking.
I was like,
you're like, wait,
what the what? What the what?
I don't know. I thought it would be a funny joke to reiterate the last, 17 questions about them. Anyway, I don't know. It's stupid. Okay, here we go. Don't make fun of me. All right. Real question here. Underscore the Oswald Linares underscore the Oswald Linares underscore. I think that's it. Asks. This is similar. This is similar.
Sure.
How can I know if I have the ability to see ghosts? Because I've been seeing figures in the corner of my eyes, and I would get chills. I remember you mentioned you people see ghosts out of their peripheral vision, episodes ago, 10, 15 episodes ago. You said that.
It's way easier for people to see it in the corners of their eyes, and in plain vision. Honestly, I didn't start seeing things in right in front of me until I was about maybe 14, 15.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
Yeah, that's the door opening is it right at the periphery, because your mind can still entertain the idea that there's something there.
Yeah.
If it shows up right in front of you, your mind will dismiss it. Your mind will be like, no, that's not real.
That ain't it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on the part of knowing if you have the ability to see spirits, you'll know. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but there's no exact symptoms of if you experience this and this, then you're a clairvoyant. It's more so you just know, because you'll start seeing things that you're that was definitely a spirit, or they start interacting with you more, and it's a very common occurrence.
Yeah, Madison and I were driving a couple days ago. We were going around that square in front of Fox and Fig. Great plant-based restaurant. If you're in Savannah and want to try that, it's really excellent. Just a small shout out to that. But anyway, we were driving around that square, and Madison, broad daylight, and Madison goes, "Do you see that ghost, that spirit right there, JT?" And I'm like, "What?" Like I look over, there's nothing. She goes, it's a African American man in a purple shirt, in a purple shirt, and I'm like, and I was like, "What?" Do you tell that story? Tell that story.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, in that situation,
what you saw.
Yeah. Basically, in that situation, it was. And this happens to me a lot in Savannah because Savannah is just full of them. A lot of times, I'll be driving or I'll be walking, and I'll think that was a real person, and then it goes boop, and I was like, because sometimes spirits are so full-bodied and so full-figured that you genuinely sometimes think like that's not a spirit, or especially when it's broad daylight and you're just driving, it's easy to just be like, oh yeah, it's just a person in the square, but then they disappear and it's like, oh yep, that was a ghost. And so I'm always interested to point it out to JT when I see those types of spirits, because I'm like, did you see it? Because I do find it, I see them obviously, but I'm like, when something is that full figured, I'm like, did other people see it? Or
I did not see it. I did not see it, but she said it with such confidence that I was just like, it like creeped me out.
It happens all the time though. Honestly,
I know it does, honey.
Ghosts on the sidewalks or in the streets, I can't stand it. I have slammed on my brakes so many times because I think there's a person in front of me and then it's a ghost. And I'm like, y'all are going to get me in a wreck one day. Which is, I guess the fun side parts of being a clairvoyant.
Which is an interesting side note, because when you're in like a crowded area where there's streets and sidewalks and just common things, there's a good chance that you are seeing ghosts all the time. Mm-hmm. You just don't realize it because it just seems like a person.
Yeah.
You might actually witness hauntings repeatedly and regularly, but these are people who had died in the recent past, so they're not, dressed in some strange way. These are probably people who are running a routine of their existence, and as you drive by, it does not stand out as strange because you don't pay attention to every person you pass as you're driving down. As long as they're not in front of your car, you probably aren't going to stop and say, that was a ghost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
It's an interesting idea that hiding in plain sight is a tactic of ghosts. Mm-hmm. And I think about this a lot with theater ghosts that come into theaters, because not every theater ghost is, some tragic actress who died or anything like that. Sometimes it's just audience members, and they may not be like regular audience members of the theater. They are just drawn in there because they can participate in a living act, which is watching a show. They can sit in the audience and not have, people don't watch plays looking at the person sitting next to them. They're looking this way. Yeah. So you can feel normal, you can feel alive, and you can participate in what living people do by going to the theaters or auditoriums or stadiums for sporting events. You can basically just be in the crowd and be like one of the people, and that must be a good imitation of being alive, to be in a crowd and to have all that energy around you and all that excitement. So yeah.
How do you know if you are seeing a ghost? What told you, Madison, that black guy with the purple shirt, he was a ghost?
He disappeared.
Okay. So that's number one. He disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw him, and then he literally, I looked over to JT, and then I looked back and he wasn't there. And to the point where it was I looked around, obviously I've seen him enough at this point where usually if they disappear quickly, I'm like, okay, that was probably a ghost. It wasn't he suddenly dipped and he's running down the street. But
if you ever see anything strange, a person where they're not supposed to be, I always say, look at their feet. Look to their feet, because in many occasions they don't even have feet, because they are manifesting an identity, and it usually is manifested from the brain or brainal area or heart. It's radiating from here and doesn't make it all the way down to the feet. Or sometimes their feet aren't touching the ground, or their feet are in the ground.
That is
because
true.
the levels of the ground have changed over time. And so you might be looking at somebody, but they're cut off at the ankle. And it's not they're cut off at the ankle, it's just that the street had been built up.
Yeah.
And so they're walking on the street as they remember it or as they know it. So, you know, there's a lot of ways, and it's a cheesy thing to say, look at the feet, see if they have feet. But it's one of the ways that I have oftentimes when people are experiencing things like, well, I had an experience in a house that I was staying in down on right on Haberdasher Bay, and I was in the living room, and I looked over and I saw what looked like he looked like a fisherman, big burly guy with like one of those fisherman caps, and I see him, and I just started sliding out of my chair, you know, just to get down onto the ground. And if you don't know me, my house is littered with swords. And so there's a sword under my couch. So I'm like leaning down to get this sword because I'm almost positive there's a man that I do not recognize standing in the hallway right around the corner. And so as I got on the floor, I'm looking under the cheap IKEA furniture I had at the time, and there were no feet where the guy was standing. And I'm just like, all right, okay. So I just stayed on the floor.
With a sword.
Yeah, with a sword in my hand.
Oh,
You're
God.
like, okay, well, if it is a person, I'm ready. And if it's not a person, I'll just stay here. I'll just be silent on the floor.
Yes.
That one's going on TikTok.
Yes. But yeah, in the sense of like how you know you're seeing a spirit, I do like to preface with saying that you did not have to die in the Victorian era or the Edwardian era to become a ghost. It's a very common misconception because people are like, why are they always ghosts from like olden times?
They are not.
They're not. It's just most of the time those are the spirits that people pick up on because they look distinctly different from you.
And oftentimes
So
they are the
it's-
ghosts that people tell stories about.
Yes.
And because they're being reinforced over time and over time, the solidification of that look, of that period, we constantly tell stories about the Victorian and Edwardian ghosts, these ghosts of a very specific time period. And that gives even ghosts that are just fledgling, you know, mist a form. They're like, oh, they want, you know, the antebellum ball gown. They want, you know, a man in a top hat. And that is one of these things where it's our expectation of what a ghost is that defines some of these spirits, because these spirits, they don't want to fade. They don't want to disappear. And they will do anything to be relevant. And we tend to make a lot of relevancy out of these old ghosts. You know, one of the oldest ghost stories ever recorded was an ancient Greek ghost story by Pliny the Younger, who wrote about this ghost that haunted him in a house he was renting. And the ghost story just sounds like any ghost story you've ever heard. He's renting a house, a guy with chains coming in, and he follows him around. But what's interesting is we stopped thinking of like toga wearing ghosts. We are not, you know, we don't see ghosts in togas, or very rarely. I'm sure somebody does, but we do and have for a long time seen ghosts with chains. Chained ghosts are a part of our narrative. We talk about the chains and the chains. And it turns out that chains used to be used to keep the bodies from coming up out of the ground before we came up with slabs or with means to keep them in. They basically anchored them into the earth so that when it rained, they wouldn't surface. And so the chains on ghosts are oftentimes because the last time we saw the living person, they were wrapped in chains and going in the ground. Same with sheets. When you see the ghosts in sheets, those are just burial shrouds. Because the last time we saw them as the person we recognize, they were wrapped in a shroud. And so when we see a ghost, we're thinking, that's Uncle Pete. But he was in a shroud. It's like, oh, yes, I'm in a shroud. And all of a sudden, we start telling these stories. I think I've mentioned it before. When I was a kid, I watched a movie with, it was Christmas Carol. Jacob Marley had a bandage around his mouth. And so I always thought that he had gone to the dentist.
That's what I thought.
But in Dickensian time, mouths involuntarily through rigor mortis will gape open after death. They actually tied the bandage around the mouth to keep the mouth shut. And that is one of those things where people were looking at the body and saw that it was tied shut instead of like going into the mouth and sewing it, which costs money. And the narrative of Jacob Marley and Scrooge would certainly not spring for any heavy work, was to tie a bandage to keep the mouth shut so that it wasn't this jarring, wide open mouth corpse.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. And it made it in because there were many ghosts who were depicted with this wrapping around their head. And I didn't know what it was. It never made sense to me. I was like, oh, I know that's, that must be that period ghost.
Sure.
That period of ghost laden with chains, wrapped with a bandage around their head.
That's so clever of them.
That is.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Trackatotten asks, can you talk about 432 Abercorn / Wilson House and what truths there are to the stories behind it? I caught images of a spirit girl in the front window. Oh boy, they can go on about 432 now.
432 is, Abercorn Street. If you're not familiar with it, it's Savannah's favorite house to dump a ghost story on.
It is the repository of many ghost stories from all around the city.
Yes. There are so many stories about, the Wilson family, the Mr. Wilson chaining his daughter to a chair, and she ended up. Okay, so basically. The house is right next to the Massey School, where the Massey School was. And that was the first school that allowed African-American children. And so a lot of times the children would be playing in the square outside of the house. And Mr. Wilson had a young daughter who was around the same age. So she would want to go out and play with the kids, obviously, because they're kids. And he did not want her being involved with them at all. So one day he catches her, playing out in the square, and he decides that he's going to punish her by taking her back inside, sitting her in front of the window that looks out into the square, and chaining her to the chair, and says that you're going to sit here until you learn your lesson. And she ends up sitting there for so long that she ended up dying of dehydration and probably heat stroke because, Savannah. So a lot of people have claimed that they've seen the little girl sitting at the window. They've also claimed to see Mr. Wilson's face in the wall.
Yeah, the outside of the house.
Yeah, which is odd. I don't know if that's just the unfortunate instance of stucco making a face, but
there's that weird stain that ran straight down the middle, and we had seen that house pressure washed and pressure cleaned time and time again, and that stain, it's a gigantic black stain that used to go down. I mean, right now that house is beautifully restored, and my guess is with the restoration comes the death of those ghost stories, because the house, absolutely, standing in front of it, you're like, oh, it was a haunted house. Because it was this beautiful mansion on a very illustrious square that was just empty for decades and decades and decades. And it amassed all the ghost stories, the triple homicide of women. You can pretty much trace that to the Gribble House story that just somehow migrated to that house, because that house truly did have this, big black stain down the middle. The windows were, all old glass, so they're all wavy. And I've seen countless pictures of strange, imagery inside the house. But people used to break into that house repeatedly, have seances in it, do all kinds of Ouija things. There's countless encounters in the house that would suggest that at the very least, people brought their baggage and dumped it there. They brought their own ghosts and left them there, because that house it was kind of a celebrated ghost house that really didn't have any stories until early 2000s.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a house that was regularly noted. However, it was always creepy. That square is incredibly creepy.
It is.
The square itself is so full of tragedy and trauma. It's the old African burial ground. It is, the kids at the Massey School went to school on top of the bodies of their own
ancestors.
Not even old ancestors, like grandparents, and not far removed. So we're talking about a place of very high spiritual energy, very high spiritual focus in a town so full of ghost stories that a lot of them are so spread out that it's like, what if we had a house that had, because the little girl, I want to say I've heard the little girl story in at least 5 different houses, to include the Hampton Lillibridge house. I've heard the little girl at the Hampton Lillibridge house, which is not true. And so, and directly across the street, across the square in the Espy house, there is Claire Espy, who apparently died when she was 6 years old. And many people think that it was Carl Espy who accidentally killed her, knocked a table over on her, or some story of that nature. And they say that they buried her in the courtyard, that her body is in the courtyard.
Oh, wow.
Like her stone is in Bonaventure, but her body's in the courtyard. However, all of that is very much up in the air because we're a town of ghost stories. We're a town of ghost storytellers. And so to have this institutionalized concept of ghost stories, people mistake ghost stories for paranormal experiences. And what you have to really learn to appreciate is that a ghost story has a different purpose than a paranormal investigation or a history lesson. There is a very specific function of a ghost story. Part of it is to open you up to the idea of ghosts, to experiment with the idea of the threshold and coming up with a way to access that without damage, without harm. Here comes a story that's going to make you think very hard about what is and isn't real. It's going to make you think really hard about the veil and how to penetrate it and how to witness it and observe it. But in the end, they're stories. No matter how well backed up a ghost story is, it's still a ghost story. We don't have any definitive proofs. We don't have any, when I say I saw a man in a Greek fisherman hat in my house, that does not constitute proof. It's my experience. But even if I snapped a picture and had it, there'll be a million people who say
it's Photoshopped.
It's Photoshopped. It's fake. It's not real. So because there is no definitive truth, no definitive proof that no one has ever established scientifically or even philosophically that there is irrefutable evidence of haunting, you have to live with the ambiguity of it all.
Yep.
Which is open to the trade of ghost storytelling.
I would say too, with 432 Abercorn Street, that is not to say that there aren't spirits in there.
Oh no, not at all.
It is highly possible there is something in there.
Highly likely.
Yeah, it's just I don't know if it's associated with the stories that are told about the house. But I will say, for the fact that you did catch a photo of a little girl in the window, it's very common for, spirits to hear all those stories that are being told literally in front of the house. And they're like, oh, there was supposed to be a little girl spirit. I'll be the little girl spirit, because it gets them attention.
They crave identity. Yeah. Absolutely. And it gives them attention. Absolutely.
Good point, babe.
So there might be something that's acting as a little girl, but I don't know if it's from the story.
That for JT's purposes, that could very well be a dark and demonic force, because demons are about the lie.
So it's funny, actually, with 432 Abercorn Street, there's this girl on TikTok who is a death witch. And she basically, talked about how she came to Savannah and walked past 432 Abercorn Street and immediately started sobbing because she had this vision of something inside that house that was keeping spirits there. Something evil that was not letting these spirits cross over.
That's like the Savannah Underground.
Yeah.
It's the whole concept of the show.
It is. And it's really interesting. And I think their experience was fascinating in that way. So,
well, strangely enough, one of the side stories of that house does involve cultish activity and attempts of contact, and there's even stories of the hardwood floor having symbols like literally carved into them. Right. And what's interesting is you don't know if the story came first or the carvings came first.
Yeah.
Somebody heard the story and went in and carved them, but people have said clearly that they can see where they had sanded so hard on the floor to get rid of these grooves, and those grooves seem to make a symbol. And that comes to this idea that when you go to a place that is highly charged, highly paranormal activity charged, the opportunistic people will try to catch the spirit or create a place of power. And Savannah, Georgia was one of the highly sought after power places in the world at one point, because there was so much activity here, because there was still the voodoo and hoodoo cultures. There was still a wide breadth of people who were fumbling around satanic practices that they got out of a book from a catalog. So you have all of this mishap, and that was in the mid to late 80s, and around the Jim Williams trials, when a lot of people were getting this concept of, oh, hey, Savannah is in fact this town of dark secrets and dark powers and magic. So that does bring us up to date with when you have a place where so many people, because that's a real common story of walking past that house and just like finding yourself stuck. Yeah. Can't move on. However, I will say it looks great now.
Oh, it looks
does.
It looks
they did
very
a great job.
lovely, lived in. And I want to say that once you got rid of the scary facade, the scary stories will diminish.
True.
Because what's to tell about standing in front of a beautiful mansion and saying, this is the most dark and scary place, if it's not dark and scary?
Yeah. And it is a private residence.
Yes, it's a private residence.
So if you do visit Savannah, don't go knocking on their doors and asking to come in and look for the, pentagrams on the ground, because I'm almost certain they will not appreciate that.
I have a very, very soft memory of me looking at that house and a woman in the courtyard, and her telling me, an old lady, and she's like, this house isn't haunted. Well, I don't know why I have this memory. I think it happened. I don't know.
No, I know that this happened.
Wait, did it happen with you, babe?
Yes, it did. Okay,
so that's why we were there. Okay.
It's because my parents came to town one time, and they were staying in an Airbnb on Jones Street, which is literally right next to the house. So we walked my family's dog over to that square, and we were standing in front of it, and there was a ghost tour group that was also there, and the owner does not appreciate the ghost tours at all, and I don't blame them, because it's
groups of 20 people looking
just staring at your house and
2-3 times an hour.
Yeah, and I remember her yelling, "This place isn't haunted,"
Oh, so that's it. Okay,
that's what the memory was.
And because the Mercer Williams house, you'll get the same response.
Oh yeah. His sister.
His sister.
Yeah.
Well, we'll beat on the windows and tell ghost tours to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for real.
Wow.
Yeah. So don't go knocking on their door, please. If you're visiting Savannah, you can admire it. You can admire it for what it is and admire the stories, because stories are fun. But just don't.
Alrighty, that's all the time we have today. But before we end, Christopher, do you have a pro ghost tip for us?
Yes, pro ghost tip.
Always.
Don't break the law when looking for ghosts. I've been arrested 3 times.
What?
For being where I don't want to be. Being where I shouldn't be. I once stayed in a museum after hours and was arrested because when I tried to leave, I set off the alarm. I was arrested in a cemetery that was private, and I was arrested inside someone's home. Well, they didn't live there, but I was trespassing. So don't do that.
Yeah, don't do
that. That's a bad idea. And luckily, in all 3 occasions, no one pressed charges because I was a harmless, idiot. And that... But I think that has long since passed. I mean, that was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I was just a kid, and I was looking for ghosts. And there was not a bunch of ghost hunting shows. There was not a bunch of ghost hunting things. I was just this guy who heard this place was haunted, and so I snuck in. Don't do that. That is a very bad idea, and it's a really good way to get arrested.
Yeah, don't get arrested for ghosts. It's not worth it. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't already, follow us over on TikTok at the Savannah Underground. Also, if you want to become a patron, you can find us at patreon.com/Savannah Underground. But with that, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.